Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the Gospel of John. Today we're going to begin looking at John chapter 7. Now notice the first verse of chapter 7. It says that after this, Jesus went around in Galilee. Now, after this, what is that referring to? Well, it refers to what occurred in chapter 6. You remember in chapter 6, Jesus had returned to Galilee, and even though it was near the time of the Passover, he stayed in Galilee. And that was the time when he fed the multitudes with the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. And then after that feeding, he walks on the water, and then he engages in that long conversation with the crowd about that he is the bread of life. So after these things occurred, it says he goes about in Galilee. In other words, he does not return to Jerusalem and Judea for a while. He stays in Galilee. Why? Well, it tells us. He did not want to go about in Judea because the Jewish leaders there were looking for a way to kill him. So it's the leadership in Jerusalem that had decided they wanted to murder Jesus. Now, why did they have this desire to kill him? What had caused this opposition? Well, you remember the last time he was in Jerusalem, he had healed the man at the pool of Bethesda, the paralytic who had been unable to walk for 38 years. And Jesus healed him. But he healed him on the Sabbath. And the Jewish leaders were upset that he healed on the Sabbath. And Jesus said, "My Father works on the Sabbath. I must work on the Sabbath as well." And that really angered them because he was making himself, they thought, equal with the Father. In truth, he was, because he is the Son. But they would not recognize the fact that he was the Son, so they consider this blasphemy. And so they have this desire. They have this desire to kill him. That's why he had stayed for the Passover in Galilee. But then verse 2 says, "But when the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles was near," now you remember the Feast of Tabernacles, that occurs in the fall. In chapter 6, it was at the time of the Passover, that's in the spring. So it's been a few months now, probably about 5 or 6 months. Jesus, at the time of the Feast of Tabernacles in the fall, is probably getting ready to return to Jerusalem. Matter of fact, Jesus' brothers say to him, "Why don't you leave Galilee? You've been staying in Galilee for a while. Why don't you go to Judea so that your disciples there may see the works you do? No one who wants to become a public figure acts in secret. Since you are doing all these things, show yourself to the world." For even his own brothers did not believe in him. So here are the brothers of Jesus, and they're saying, "Why don't you go to Judea and do these things? If you really are a prophet, you need to show yourself in Jerusalem." Obviously, he's been performing great signs in Galilee. We've already seen the feeding of the multitudes. We've seen the walking on the water. There were other signs as well that's implied here. But his brothers are kind of saying, "Why don't you go to Jerusalem and show yourself?" Now, it also says they didn't really believe in him. It's interesting that the brothers of Jesus did not believe in him until after the resurrection. Even though they knew him, and even though they had grown up with him, and even though they had seen all that he was doing, heard all that he was saying, they did not believe in him. It was hard for them to believe that their brother was the Son of God. And so they don't have faith in him. That comes after the resurrection. After the resurrection, they come to believe. And we know, of course, that one of the brothers of Jesus, James, would become eventually the leader of the church in Jerusalem. But at this time, they don't believe. And so they're kind of challenging Jesus. "Well, if you really are the Messiah," no, we don't believe you are, but if you really are, why don't you go to Jerusalem? Jesus tells them, verse 6, "My time is not yet here. For you, any time will do. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me, because I testify that its works are evil. You go to the festival. I'm not going up to the festival, because my time has not yet fully come." And so after he said this, he stayed in Galilee. So obviously his brothers are going to the festival, but Jesus says, "My time is not yet come." And when Jesus talks about my time, he's referring to the atonement. When the time is perfect, he will give himself in sacrifice. That's not here yet. That's not here yet. So I'm not operating on your time schedule, and I'm operating on mine. Now later on, Jesus is going to go, but he's not going at their bidding. He goes under his own agenda. But basically, he's telling the disciples, the time is not yet for me to give myself in atoning sacrifice. That will come. but not yet. So anyway, he stays in Galilee, and they go on ahead to the Feast of Tabernacles. But then verse 10 says, however, after his brothers had left for the festival, Jesus went also, not publicly, but in secret. So he's going to the festival, but not in a public manner. He's going to choose his own timing and his own agenda and his own arrival. But he is going. And when he gets there, some significant things are going to happen. So we'll look more at this Feast of the Tabernacles when Jesus arrives and what Jesus has to say in our next session of our 5-minute Bible study in the Gospel of John.